Look at the boy in this photograph. His name, according to the SS file, is Hermann. He is 3 years old, blonde hair, blue eyes, the perfect Aryan specimen, the future of the thousand-year Reich. But this is a lie. His name is not Hermann. It is Henrik. He is not German. He is Polish. And he is not an orphan. He was ripped from his mother's arms in a frozen market square in Lodz, measured like livestock, and shipped to a secret facility to be brainwashed. He is one of 200,000 children stolen by the Nazis to breed a master race. By all logic, Henrik should have vanished. His name should have been erased. But watching from the corner of the nursery was a young nurse named Alya. She had no weapon. She had no radio. All she had was a jar of pickled beets and a suicidal plan to steal him back. This is the story of the woman who fought the SS with a pencil. It is 1942. The place is Bad Paulzine, a resort town in what is now occupied Poland. In the center of the town stands a magnificent building. White walls, high windows, manicure gardens. To the locals, it is a charity. To the SS, it is a Lebensborn home, a fount of life. On paper, it is a maternity home for SS wives. In reality, it is a processing plant for stolen human beings. Alya is 22. She is Polish, a medical student pulled from Warsaw to serve as a slave laborer. But because she has blue eyes and speaks fluent German, she isn't sent to a factory. She is sent here. She walks the polished marble corridors. The air smells of lavender and strong disinfectant. It is quiet, too quiet. Her job is simple. Care for the orphans from the East. Feed them vitamins. Sit them under sun lamps to darken their skin. Teach them German songs. At first, Alya tries to keep her head down. Survival in 1942 means invisibility. But the cracks in the perfection begin to show immediately. It starts at night. Alya is on the night shift. The ward is dark. Rows of white iron cribs line the room. A little boy admitted that morning as Hans is sobbing into his pillow. Alya approaches him. "Was this Los Hans?" she whispers in German. "What is wrong?" The boy doesn't understand. He looks at her with terrifying, hollow eyes. He is 5 years old, but he has the gaze of an old man. "Kto do mamy?" he whispers. Alya freezes. It isn't German. It is Polish. "I want my mommy." She looks at the door. The SS guard is down the hall. She kneels beside the bed. "Who are you?" She whispers back in his own language. "JC," he cries. "My name is JC. They took my coat, the one with the blue buttons." Alya looks at the chart at the foot of the bed. Hans L. born, Munich. Parents, deceased. It is a fabrication. A bureaucratic fiction designed to turn a kidnapped Slavic child into a German soldier. Over the next week, the reality of her position crashes down on her. She is not a nurse. She is a mechanic in a factory that disassembles identities. She watches the process. It is brutal in its efficiency. Children arrive in gray vans. They're stripped of their Polish clothes, the clothes their mothers sewed for them. Those clothes are burned in the incinerator. They are forbidden from speaking their native tongue. If they speak Polish, they are beaten. If they cry, they are locked in the dark room, in the basement, until they learn to be silent. Alya realizes she is standing in the middle of a crime scene. But there are no bodies. There's only the slow murder of memory. She wants to run. Every instinct screams at her to flee. But then she meets Dr. Gregor Ebner. Ebner is the medical director. He wears an SS uniform under his white coat. He is a man of science, precise and cold. He doesn't hate the children. He loves them, but he loves them like a farmer loves prize cattle. One morning, during inspection, Ebner stops in front of a 6-year-old girl named Basha. He takes out a metal caliper. He measures her skull width. He checks her nose against a chart. "This one," Ebner says, disappointed. "The cranial index is acceptable, but the temperament is degenerate. She refuses to adapt. What shall we do, her doctor? The head nurse asks. Send her to Kalish, Ebner says casually, marking a red X on her file. If she cannot be Germanized, she is a useless eater. We will liquidate the inventory. Liquidate. Alya knows what that means. Kalish is the waiting room for the gas chambers. As they drag the screaming girl away, Alya makes eye contact with her. And in that second, the fear in Alya's heart turns into something else. Something cold and hard. She realizes that if she runs, these children die. If she stays and does nothing, they die. Or worse, they forget who they are and become the very monsters who killed their parents. She has to save them. Not just their lives, but their names. That night, alone in the nurse's dormitory, Alya makes a decision that effectively ends her life as a bystander. She takes a scrap of paper she stole from the trash. She takes a pencil. She writes, Basha, age 6, from Lodz, scar on left knee, sent to Kalish. It is the first entry. It is a death sentence if found. She looks around her small room. Where could she hide a list? The SS inspects the lockers. They check under the mattresses. Then, she remembers the cellar. The nurses are allowed to keep jars of preserved fruit and vegetables for the winter. Alya goes down to the cold, damp basement. She finds a jar of pickled beets. She carefully soaks off the label. On the back of the label, in tiny, microscopic script, she writes the name, Basha. Then she glues the label back on. To the world, it is just a jar of beets. To Alya, it is a tombstone. She has started her war, but she has no idea that the enemy is already watching her. The nursery ran like a machine. 6 o'clock, wake up. 7 o'clock, porridge and propaganda. 12 o'clock, racial inspection. Alya moved through the routine like a ghost. To the SS doctors, she was just Nurse Alya, a pair of efficient hands that changed sheets and administered cod liver oil. They didn't see the investigator behind the eyes. Her investigation wasn't conducted with a magnifying glass. It was conducted with a bath sponge and a towel. It was espionage performed in the split seconds between checking a pulse and smoothing a blanket. She realized quickly that names were fragile. The Nazis could change a birth certificate with a typewriter. They could burn a file. She needed evidence that couldn't be erased by fire. She needed the body. She began to examine the children with the obsession of a forensic pathologist. When she bathed them, she wasn't just washing off dirt. She was mapping them. Little Hans had a jagged scar on his left knee, shaped like a crescent moon. Ingrid had a birthmark behind her right ear, the color of coffee. Gretel had a malformed toe. She memorized these markers. At night, she crept down to the cold cellar. She soaked the labels off her jars of beets and cherries. On the back, in a microscopic cipher she had invented, she connected the dots. Jar 4, pickled plums. Hans, scar on knee. Real name, JCU from Warsaw. To the naked eye, it was a pantry. To Alya, it was an archive of souls. But to get the real names, she had to penetrate the heart of the beast, the Schreibstube, the records room. It was strictly off limits. Only the head nurse and the SS officers held the key. Alya noticed a pattern. Every Tuesday at 1400 hours, the head nurse took her coffee break in the garden. She left her apron with the keys hanging by the door. It was a window of 15 minutes. The first time Alya stole the key, the metallic clink sounded like a gunshot. She slipped inside the office. The smell of stale cigarette smoke and bureaucratic dust filled her nose. She opened the file cabinet, and there it was, the anatomy of a kidnapping. Thousands of pages, lists of children from Lodz, Lublin, Kiev, photos of them crying as they were measured, and next to each Polish name, a new, typed German identity. Basha K becomes Barbara Klein. Destination, family of SS Sturmbannführer Hamburg. Alya didn't have a camera. She had to become a human camera. She stared at the pages, burning the names into her brain, reciting them like a prayer until she could transfer them to the jars. 5 minutes. 10 minutes. Footsteps in the hall. Alya froze. She shoved the file back. She smoothed her apron. The door handle turned. Locked. Hello. A voice. The janitor. Alya held her breath, her heart hammering against her ribs. The handle rattled again. Then silence. The footsteps moved away. She slipped out, sweat soaking her back, replacing the key seconds before the head nurse returned. She had the data. But the villain, Dr. Gregor Ebner, was not just a bureaucrat. He was a true believer, and believers are observant. Ebner visited the ward frequently. He liked to play with the children. It was a grotesque sight. This man in a black uniform, smelling of antiseptic and death, bouncing a toddler on his knee. He genuinely loved them, but he loved them like a collector loves a rare butterfly. One afternoon, Ebner caught Alya staring at him as he examined a boy named Marek. Marek was fighting, screaming in Polish. Ebner turned to Alya. His eyes were pale gray and devoid of warmth. "You seem distressed, Nurse Alya," he said softly. It was a trap, a test of loyalty. "No, her doctor," Alya lied. Her voice was steady. "I only wish the process were faster. For the child's sake." Ebner walked over to her. He stood too close. "It is the blood," he whispered, tapping his temple. "It remembers the Slavic filth. We must wash it out. Sometimes the washing is painful. We're gardeners, Alya. We must prune the weeds to let the flower bloom." He studied her face, looking for a twitch, a flinch. Alya made her eyes blank. She became the perfect Aryan machine he wanted to see. "Good," he said. But as he walked away, Alya knew. He was watching her. And then the false lead arrived. A new nurse named Katerina. Katerina was young, nervous, and spoke with a Slavic accent. Alya watched her. She saw the same fear in Katerina's eyes that she felt in her own. Was she an ally? Another forced labor? One night, in the dormitory, Katerina leaned over. "I know what they are doing," she whispered. "It is a sin." Alya's heart leaped. She opened her mouth to tell Katerina about the jars. But a rule of the underground flashed in her mind. Trust no one. "I don't know what you mean," Alya said coldly. "We are doing God's work." Katerina's face changed. The nervousness vanished, replaced by a shark-like calculation. She smiled. "Of course. Heil Hitler." The next morning, Alya saw Katerina having tea with Dr. Ebner, laughing. Katerina was a mole, a plant sent to weed out disloyal staff. Alya had come within one sentence of the firing squad. The cage was tightening. Ebner suspected. Katerina was watching. And in the cellar, the jars of beets sat in the dark, a ticking time bomb of glass and vinegar. By 1943, the atmosphere inside the home had shifted. The news from the Eastern Front was bad. Stalingrad had fallen. The master race was dying in the snow. Inside Bad Paulsine, the clinical arrogance turned into brittle paranoia. Food rations were cut. The heating was turned off. But for Alya, the cold was nothing compared to the eyes of Katerina. The mole was everywhere. Katerina didn't work. She prowled. She checked duty logs. She stood silently in doorways. Alya couldn't go to the cellar. The jars of beets sat in the dark, gathering dust, the names on the back suspended in time. But the trucks kept coming. More stolen children. More names Alya couldn't record. Desperate, she looked outside. She needed a lifeline. She focused on Otto, the old German milkman who delivered supplies. He seemed kind. He sometimes slipped apples to the children. Alya spent weeks grooming him. Finally, she took the risk. She slipped a folded note into his hand by the loading dock. "My mother is sick in Warsaw. Please. Otto looked at the note. His face went gray. Fräulein, he whispered, his voice shaking. Do not. They shot the baker yesterday. For a radio. I have a wife. He handed the note back. He didn't report her. That was his mercy. But he wouldn't help her. The door to the outside slammed shut. Alya was completely alone. And then the horror escalated. Berlin sent new orders. Resources were scarce. The Reich could no longer afford to feed useless eaters. The criteria for Germanization became stricter. Dr. Ebner began weeding the garden. It happened on a Tuesday. Ebner walked the rows of cribs. He stopped at a 3-year-old girl named Marzena. Alya had named her Marta in the jars. Marzena had a chronic ear infection. She cried often. Defective, Ebner said, marking his clipboard. Transfer to Kalish. Kalish meant death. Alya's reflex was to beg. Her doctor, it is just an infection. With medicine. Ebner spun on her. Do we have medicine to waste on Slavic trash, nurse? You seem very attached to these specimens. Katerina tells me you sing to them. Alya's blood ran cold. I sing nonsense to quiet them, she lied. See that it remains nonsense, Ebner snapped. Dress her. The truck is waiting. This is the growing despair. Alya had to dress Marzena. She had to button the little coat and carry the weeping child to the gray van. She had to hand her to the SS driver. She had to participate in the murder to save her cover. As the truck drove away, taking Marzena to the gas chambers, Alya stood on the steps and waved. She smiled. She looked like a loyal German nurse. Inside, she was screaming. She went to the bathroom and vomited until she was empty. Then she washed her face and went back to work, because there were 200 other children still in the beds. But the deepest blow wasn't death. It was erasure. The boy, J.C. Hans. He was 6 now. He was the star pupil. He marched with a little wooden rifle. He spoke only German. Ebner announced that Hans had been selected for adoption by a high-ranking SS family in Berlin. It was the ultimate success. Alya packed his bag. Hans, she whispered, risking everything one last time. Do you remember the song? About the gray cat. The boy looked at her with cold, blue eyes. A stranger's eyes. Cats are for weaklings, he said in perfect German. I'm a soldier. He was gone. JCU was dead. Only Hans remained. Alya watched him salute Dr. Ebner and climb into the staff car. As he drove away to the heart of the Reich, she felt a piece of her soul snap. That night, she risked the cellar. She found the jar marked cherries. She scraped off the label. She crossed out JCU, and next to it, she wrote, Lost. Then, the final blow. The Russians were breaking through. The front was collapsing. We evacuate, Ebner announced. To Bavaria. To the interior. Evacuation meant chaos. It meant leaving the cellar. It meant leaving the jars. Alya had a choice. Stay and wait for liberation, or follow the SS into the mouth of the beast to protect the evidence. If she stayed, she survived, but the names would be lost. If she went, she would likely die in the bombing of Germany. She looked at Katerina packing silver into a suitcase. She looked at Ebner burning files. Alya went to the cellar. She emptied her trunk of clothes. She wrapped the jars in her spare uniforms, beets, plums, cherries, and packed them tight. She was going into the heart of darkness, and she was taking the children's souls with her. The evacuation was not a military retreat. It was a carnival of the damned. January 1945. The Red Army was crushing the German lines. The roads were clogged with refugees, horses, and broken trucks. And in the middle of this frozen chaos was a convoy carrying the future of the Reich. 300 confused, crying children. Alya sat in a freezing cattle car. She wrapped her arms around her trunk. Every time the train lurched, the glass jars inside clinked. To anyone else, it sounded like groceries. To Alya, It sounded like a fragile history threatening to shatter. The journey took 5 days. Dysentery broke out. There was no medicine. Alya tore up her spare uniforms, the ones cushioning the jars, to use as diapers. On the third night, the train stopped near Dresden. The sirens began to scream. The sky turned an apocalyptic orange. The Allies were firebombing the city. The SS guards ran for the bunkers, locking the children inside the train. Alya sat in the dark, holding two small hands. The heat from the burning city radiated through the wooden slats. In that red darkness, the doubt hit her. Why am I doing this? We're going to burn. The jars will melt. I should have run. But then Dr. Ebner spoke from the corner of the car. He hadn't run. He was holding a flashlight, shining it on a terrified boy. Heinrich, Ebner muttered, writing in a notebook. Reaction to stress. Poor. Signs of Slavic instability. The world was ending, and he was still grading their racial purity. The rage burned away Alya's doubt. I will outlast you, she thought. They arrived in Bavaria at a facility called Steinhorn. It was the dumping ground for the collapsing Lebensborn program. Thousands of children. No food. No heat. Total chaos. The administration had broken down. There were no more intake forms. The children arrived as bodies without names. Alya's system, matching a German file to a Polish name, was dead. She retreated to the kitchen, assigned to peel potatoes. It was a punishment, but it gave her access to the pantry where she hid her trunk behind flour sacks. Then, the moment of terror. Katerina, the mole, was now the kitchen supervisor. One afternoon, she kicked the flour sacks aside. She saw the trunk. What is this? She demanded. Alya froze. Winter clothes. Katerina kicked the trunk. Clink. She smiled a shark smile. Glass. Are you hoarding schnapps, Alya? Or jam? Hoarding was a capital offense. Open it, Katerina ordered. Alya knelt. Her hand shook. This is it. She will see the labels. She will see the cipher. She opened the lid. Inside, wrapped in stained rags, were the jars. Dark red beets. Katerina laughed. Beets? You stupid Polish cow. She reached down and grabbed a jar. She held it up to the light. Alya stopped breathing. The label faced out. Rote Beete. But if Katerina turned it around, if she looked through the glass. Katerina sneered. Disgusting peasant food. She dropped the jar back into the trunk. Crack. Red juice bled into the white cloth. It looked like a murder scene. Throw this trash out, Katerina spat. If I find it here again, I shoot you myself. Alya closed the trunk. She dragged it out the back door into the snow. She didn't take it to the incinerator. She went to the edge of the woods. She dug a hole with her bare hands in the frozen mud. She buried the trunk. She marked the spot with a triangular stone. It was a graveyard for the truth. She had saved the evidence, but she had lost access to it. She couldn't add any more names. The investigation was dead. April 1945. The American artillery could be heard in the distance. The end was here. Dr. Ebner stopped measuring heads. He started drinking. He burned the official files in the courtyard. Alya watched the black ash float into the sky. The official history was gone. Only her buried beets remained. But Ebner had one final task. He emerged from the building carrying a medical bag. He walked toward the infirmary where the sickest children lay. He had the look of a man tidying up. He wasn't going to cure them. He was going to liquidate the witnesses. Alya looked around. She was alone. No weapon. No allies. She grabbed a heavy iron poker from the stove. The time for taking notes was over. The infirmary smelled of impending death. Dr. Ebner stood over the crib of 4-year-old Anka. In his hand was a syringe filled with phenol. He didn't look like a monster. He looked like a tired grandfather performing a sad duty. He whispered, "It will be quick." He found a vein in her small, pale arm. Behind him Alya raised the iron poker. She didn't scream. Screaming gives a warning. She stepped forward, the heavy metal rising in a silent arc. She aimed for the hand that held the needle. Clang. Iron shattered bone. Ebner howled. The syringe flew across the room, smashing against the tiled wall. The deadly liquid hissed on the floor. Ebner spun around, clutching his wrist. His face contorted from benevolence to reptilian rage. He reached for his holster with his good hand. "You Polish bitch," he hissed. "I should have gassed you in lots." Alya stood her ground. She was shaking, but not with fear, with adrenaline. "Touch her," she said, her voice guttural, "and I will open your skull." Ebner struggled with the holster flap. He pulled the Luger free. He leveled it at Alya's chest. "You have signed your death warrant." Alya closed her eyes. She thought of Jesu. "At least I tried." Boom! The stained glass window blew inward. Shards of colored glass rained down on the cribs. Outside, a voice amplified by a loudspeaker cut through the Bavarian air. It was speaking English. "This is the United States Army. Surrender immediately." Ebner flinched. He looked at the window, then at Alya, then at his broken wrist. The fanaticism drained out of him, replaced by the instinct of a rat. He dropped the gun. He grabbed a towel to wrap his wrist. "I was protecting them," he stammered, already rehearsing his lie. "I am a doctor. I stayed behind." He ran out the door to surrender, to play the role of the civilized professional. Alya dropped the poker. She sank to her knees beside Anka. The girl was still sleeping, unaware she had been seconds from erasure. Half an hour later, the facility was swarming with GIs. They were huge men, smelling of diesel and tobacco. They looked at the nurses with suspicion and the children with confusion. A tall American captain from the Counterintelligence Corps, CIC, Captain Miller, walked into the administration office. He kicked the pile of black ash in the fireplace. "Gone," Miller said. "They burned the records. We have 300 kids here and no idea who they are." He turned to the staff. "Does anyone speak English?" Alya stepped forward. She was covered in soot and beet juice. She looked like a wreck. "I speak," she said. "Do you know where the files are?" Miller asked. Alya shook her head. "The paper is gone." Miller sighed. "Great. Another dead end. We'll have to tag them, as Jane does." "No," Alya said. Her voice was sharp. "Not paper. Glass. Glass. Come with me. Bring a shovel." She led the Americans to the edge of the woods. The mud was heavy. They dug where she pointed. Clunk. They pulled out the rotting trunk. Alya pried the latch. She threw back the lid. Rows of glass jars. Pickled beets. Cherries. Plums. Miller stared. "Groceries? You brought me out here for groceries." Alya pulled out a jar of plums. She didn't wipe the mud off. She held it up. "Look." Through the glass. Miller squinted. On the back of the label, glued to the glass, was tiny, cramped handwriting. "Name, Heinrich L. Oligan, Lutz. True name, Henryk Kowalski. Scar on right thumb." Miller's eyes went wide. He picked up another jar. And another. Ingrid. Helena from Poznan. Gretel. Grazina from Warsaw. It was an archive. A library of souls preserved in vinegar. "How many?" Miller asked. 500, Alya said. "Some are broken, but I remember them." This was the breakthrough. The Nazis believed fire could erase history. They hadn't counted on a Polish nurse's stubbornness. Back in the main hall, the resurrection began. Alya sat at a table with Miller. She opened the jars. "Bring me Hermann Ludek," she said. The boy was brought forward. He saluted the Americans. "Hermann," Alya said gently in Polish. "Your name is Henryk. Look at your thumb." She showed him the scar, the breadcrumb. The boy stared at his hand. The certainty in his eyes wavered. "Henryk," he whispered. "Yes," Alya wept. "And your mother is Ava." But the story required justice. Dr. Ebner was in custody, but he was charming the interrogators. He claimed he ran a welfare charity. He claimed the children were war orphans found on roadsides. He denied knowing they were stolen. "We need proof of intent," Miller told Alya. "Without it, he walks." Alya looked at the jars. The names proved identity, but not the crime of kidnapping. She needed to prove Ebner knew. She remembered the rose bushes in Bad Paulsine, the trophy collection. "Contact the Russians," she told Miller. "Tell them to dig up the rose garden in Bad Paulsine." It was a long shot, but the teletype was sent. 2 weeks later, a crate arrived from the Soviet zone. Inside were not roses. Inside were hundreds of buttons, Nama tags sewn in Polish, and a leather-bound notebook. It was Ebner's diary, buried by Katerina before she fled. Miller opened it. August 14th, 1942. "The shipment from Lodz is disappointing. I have ordered the liquidation of 10 subjects." It was a confession. Alya looked at the buttons. The tiny remnants of the clothes mothers had dressed their children in. The investigation was complete. She had the bodies, the weapon, and the motive. The net was closed. October 1947. Nuremberg, Germany. The Palace of Justice stood like an island in a sea of rubble. Outside, the city was a lunar landscape of twisted steel and brick. Inside, under the high coffered ceilings, the Allied military tribunal was conducting the WWII trial, the trial of the race experts. 14 men sat in the dock. Stripped of their uniforms, their medals, and their pistols, they didn't look like monsters. They looked like disgruntled bank managers. They wore ill-fitting civilian suits. They took notes. Among them, sitting stiffly with his chin raised, was Dr. Gregor Ebner. This is the confrontation. It wasn't a gunfight. It was a war of words fought in a room that smelled of floor wax and old paper. Alya sat in the gallery. She was 27 now, but her eyes held the weariness of a woman of 60. She watched as Ebner took the stand. His defense strategy was sickeningly brilliant. He did not deny the existence of the homes. He framed them as a humanitarian effort. "We were a welfare organization," Ebner told the American judges, his voice professorial. "War creates orphans. We found these children wandering in the ruins. They were starving. We washed them. We fed them. We gave them a home. Is charity now a war crime?" He looked at the judges with genuine indignation. He was gambling on their ignorance. He was gambling that the Americans, desperate to rebuild Germany against the Soviet threat, wouldn't want to dig too deep into the biology of the Nazi state. And it was working. Without the original intake records, which everyone believed were burned, it was his word against the silence of thousands of missing children. Then, the prosecutor stood up. The prosecution calls Alya Rozova. Alya walked to the witness stand. She felt Ebner's eyes on her. For the first time in years, she looked back. She didn't see the terrifying SS officer anymore. She saw a small, deluded man. "State your name." "Alya Rozova." "Formerly Nurse Alya." The prosecutor walked to a table covered in a white sheet. He pulled it back. There was no dramatic weapon, just rows of glass jars, pickled beets, plums, and a small wooden box filled with buttons. A murmur went through the courtroom. "Tell the court what these are," the prosecutor said. Alya picked up a jar of beets. She scraped the label. "This is not a beet. This is Barbara. Stolen from Lodz, September 1942. Her mother screamed for 3 blocks chasing the truck. She picked up a blue button with a chip in it. This button belonged to a coat worn by a boy named Merrick. Dr. Ebner ordered his clothes burned because they smelled of the ghetto. I dug this out of the ash." She picked up the diary. Ebner's face went white. "And this," Alya said, "is the doctor's prescription." She read the entry from August 14th, 1942. The entry about the liquidation of 10 children who looked too Jewish. "He didn't save orphans," Alya said, her voice filling the room. He curated a collection, and when the specimens didn't fit his standards, he threw them into the fire. Ebner stood up. The mask of the civilized doctor cracked. They were degenerate, he shouted, his voice shaking. I was purifying the stock. You cannot build a future on rotten foundations. I did what was necessary for the health of the Vogue. It was the confession, not an apology, but a justification. In his rage, he admitted that he saw these children not as humans, but as biological material. The judges looked at him. The defense lawyer looked down at the table. The spell was broken. The breadcrumbs, the tiny details Alya had collected at the risk of her life, had led straight to the killer's soul. Alya looked at him. You are not a doctor, she said quietly. You are a thief. You stole their lives. You stole their memories. But you did not steal their names. I have them all. Ebner slumped back. He knew it was over. But the confrontation had one final, personal chapter. After her testimony, Alya was allowed to walk past the dock. She stopped in front of Ebner. Where is Hans? She asked. Yeshu, the boy you sent to Berlin. Ebner looked up. His eyes were dead. He is fighting, he muttered. He went to the front with the Hitler Youth in April. He died defending the chancellery. Alya felt a cold wind pass through her. Yeshu, the boy who cried for his mother, dead in the ruins of Berlin, fighting for the man who stole him. It was the final dagger. Even in victory, there was loss. The Nazis had successfully turned the victim into a martyr for their cause. But Alya didn't break. She walked out of the courtroom into the autumn sunlight. She took a deep breath. The air didn't smell of coal smoke or antiseptic. It smelled of rain and stone. She had faced a monster, and she had named him. March 10th, 1948. The final day of the WWII trial. The judges returned their verdict. Dr. Gregor Ebner stood in the dock. He stood straight, adjusting his tie, expecting his humanitarian defense to hold. He was found guilty. Guilty of kidnapping. Guilty of membership in a criminal organization. Guilty of crimes against humanity. But here's the bitter pill that history often forces us to swallow. Justice in a courtroom is rarely as satisfying as justice in a movie. Ebner was sentenced to 2 years and 8 months. Because he had already served that time in detention, he was essentially a free man. Alya sat in the gallery, her hands clenched in her lap. She watched him walk out of the courtroom, not in chains, but into the arms of his wife. He would go on to live a quiet life in Bavaria, practicing medicine until he died an old man in 1974. It felt like a defeat. It felt like the world had shrugged at the theft of 200,000 souls. But the real justice in this story didn't come from the judge's gavel. It came from the trunk of jars. While Ebner walked free, the evidence Alya had buried in the mud went to work. The International Tracing Service and the Red Cross took possession of the Beet archive. Using Alya's encoded lists, they launched the largest child search operation in history. Teams of social workers fanned out across a shattered Germany. They went into foster homes, into orphanages, into the houses of SS widows. They carried Alya's list. Basha, Barbara, Hamburg. They found her. She was 7 years old, living with a German family. She spoke only German. She didn't remember the mother who screamed on Piotrkoska Street. But the social worker checked her left knee. There was the scar. The reunion took place in a displaced persons camp in Frankfurt. Ava, Beja's mother, had survived the labor camps. She was skeletal, her hair gray. When she saw the healthy German girl walking toward her, she hesitated. Basha, she whispered. The girl looked confused. Then Ava sang. She sang the Polish lullaby about the gray cat. The girl stopped. Her face crumpled. A buried synapse fired in the deep brain. She ran. She hit her mother's chest with the force of a collision. That was the verdict. That was the execution of the Nazi plan. Every reunion was a bullet in the heart of the ideology that tried to erase them. Alya returned to Poland in 1949. Warsaw was a ruin. She went back to nursing. She worked in a pediatric hospital, caring for the generation the war had tried to kill. She never married. She never had children of her own. She told friends she had too many children already. She lived in a small apartment. Her life was quiet. She bought fresh vegetables at the market. She listened to the radio. She didn't write a memoir. She didn't give interviews. But every year, at Christmas, the card would arrive. They came from Israel, from America, from France. Photos of weddings. Photos of graduations. Photos of newborn babies held by women who had once been names on a jar of plums. Dear Aunt Alya, I'm a doctor now. Dear Alya, this is my son. We named him Merrick. She kept him in a shoebox under her bed. This was her legacy. Not a medal, but a box of proofs that life had won. But we must face the darker side of the legacy, too. The Nazis stole approximately 200,000 Polish children. After the war, only about 30,000 were returned. The rest, 170,000 children, remained in Germany. They grew up believing they were Germans. They died never knowing their true names, never knowing that a mother in Poland had waited for them until her dying breath. That is the true crime of the Lebensborn. It wasn't just mass murder, it was mass amnesia, a successful theft of a future. Alya died in 1986. She died in her sleep. When neighbors found her, there was a single, framed photograph on her bedside table. It wasn't a picture of the children she saved. It was a picture of JC Hans, the boy who was lost, the boy who died in Berlin fighting for the man who stole him. She kept it as a reminder that vigilance has a cost and that you cannot save everyone. But why does this story matter now? Why should you care about a nurse and her jars of beets? Because the mechanism of the crime has not vanished. The bureaucracy of erasure, changing names, destroying records, separating families for their own good, is a tool that tyrants still use. Alya teaches us that resistance doesn't always look like a soldier storming a beach. Sometimes, resistance looks like a woman peeling potatoes with her eyes open. Sometimes, the most powerful weapon against a totalitarian state is a pencil and a piece of paper. She proved that the truth is resilient. It can be buried in mud. It can be hidden in vinegar. It can be burned in a furnace. But if one person refuses to forget, the truth survives. The Nazi doctors looked at those children and saw biological material. Alya looked at them and saw human beings. In the end, her vision prevailed. The 1,000-year Reich lasted 12 years. The children she saved lived for 80. Look at the photo we started with. The boy Hermann. He is alive today. He lives in Chicago. His name is Henrik. He has 7 grandchildren. And every Thanksgiving, he tells them the story of the nurse who gave him back his name. He tells them about the woman who stood in the kitchen of hell and refused to let the fire take him. This is the story they try to burn. This is the story they tried to bury. But names are stubborn things. And thanks to the nurse of the master race, they were written in a book that could not be closed.